You know, in 2021 in Canada, the term box execution relates a lot to one of the last executions in Canada by hanging. But for a lot of Canadians and a lot of Americans as well, box executions came into prominence many, many years ago. Actually, something would happen at the turn of the 20th century where a certain person known as Blackjack, Tom Ketchum, was executed for murder, and it was botched in a hanging because the rope was too long. Now, it could sound like a country song. They're going to execute me, mama, but tell them to make sure the rope is the right size, because the details about what happened are so bizarre. If it wasn't history, you wouldn't believe it. Now, Thomas Edward Ketchum, again known as Blackjack, born on Halloween 1863, executed on April 26, 1901, was an American cowboy who later became an outlaw. He was executed in 1901 for attempted train robbery. The execution by hanging was botched, and he was decapitated due to the executioner using a rope that was too long. Now, San Saba County, Texas was his region of birth, and again, he was executed in Union County, New Mexico. Now, at the time, train robbery was an executionable offense. Now, born in San Saba, he left Texas in 1890, possibly after committing a crime. He worked as a cowboy in the Pecos River Valley, New Mexico, where by 1894, his older brother, Sam Ketchum, don't know his relation to the singer, had joined him. Blackjack and a group of others were named as the robbers of an Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railway train that was en route to Deming, New Mexico territory in 1892 with a large payroll. The gang supposedly robbed a train just outside the Nut, New Mexico territory, which was a water station 20 miles north of Deming. Blackjack and his gang would often visit a ranch of Herb Bassett near Browns Park, Colorado, who was known to have done business with several outlaws of the day, having supplied them with beef for food and fresh horses. Herb Bassett was the father of the infamous female outlaws Josie Bassett and Ann Bassett, who were girlfriends of several members of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch Gang. One of Ann Bassett's boyfriends and future Wild Bunch Gang member, Ben Kilpatrick, began riding with Blackjack's gang around that time. Outlaw Bronco Bill Walters, later noted for the legend of his hidden loot near Sullomville, Arizona, is also believed to have begun riding with the gang at this time. Now, the second major crime attributed to Tom was the murder of a neighbor, John N. Jap Powers, in Tom Green County, Texas, on December 12, 1895. However, information at the Sutton Historical Society in Texas says that Will Carver and Ketchum were the ones actually accused of killing Powers in Knickerbocker. Fearing the law, they closed their joint saloon and gambling venture in St. Angelo and hit the outlaw trail. Within 6 months, Mrs. Powers and her lover J.E. Wright were arrested for the murder, but it was too late for Carver and the Ketchums. By late 1895, outlaw Harvey Kid Curry Logan and his brother Lonnie Curry were members of Blackjack's gang. However, in early 1896, a dispute concerning their share of robbery loot prompted the Currys to leave the gang. It was alleged that Ketchum was involved with the February 1st, 1896 disappearance and presumed murders of Albert Jennings Fountain and his son Henry Fountain of Las Cruces, New Mexico. In early June 1996, after working for the famed Bell Ranch, New Mexico, Tom and Sam Ketchum and possibly others robbed a combined store and post office at Liberty, New Mexico, northwest of present-day Tucumcari. According to contemporary accounts, the Ketchums rode into Liberty on June 12 and purchased supplies. That evening, a thunderstorm began, and they returned to the store, owned by Morris and Levi Herstein, who invited them to take shelter. Now, returning the next morning to open his store, Levi found that both the store and post office had been burglarized. After gathering a posse, he set out on the outlaw's trail. The posse composed of just 4 men, took the 2 outlaws by surprise in Plaza Largo Arroyo, where a shootout began. Seconds later, both Levi Herstein and Hermenegildo Gallegos lay dead. Seeing his comrades fall, Anastasio Borghi turned his horse and rode out of the arroyo. Placido Gurley, the 4th member of the posse, also survived to give an account. Gurley said he had been struck by a 30-30 bullet that knocked him off his horse. He landed on the ground with a blow that knocked the wind out of him. He lay in a semi-conscious state as Blackjack Ketchum emptied his rifle into the bodies of Levi Herstein and Hermenegildo Gallegos. Tom and Sam Ketchum were never tried for the killings at Plaza Largo, but Morris reportedly was present in Clayton, New Mexico territory to witness the hanging of Blackjack Ketchum in 1901. Now, Morris moved to Clayton shortly after killing a Liberty and finally into the Texas Panhandle area. This is memorialized by an inscription on a shoe bus, Herstein's, Clayton, New Mexico, Darlar, Texas. If it's from Herstein's, it's correct. Morris was the father of Albert Herstein, who became one of the founders of Big Tree Industries in Houston, and the man who helped the museum in Clayton to become a reality years later. Now, following this event, Thomas Ketchum joined other outlaws of the Hole in the Wall gang and continued a life of crime, focusing on train robberies, although when not robbing trains, they worked for several ranches in New Mexico and also Texas. Several other notable outlaws operated out of Hole in the Wall, which was a hideout for numerous outlaw gangs which operated separately. The famous Wild Bunch gang, led by Butch Cassidy and Eli Lee, operated out of there. One Wild Bunch gang member, Kid Curry, along with his brother Lonnie, had previously ridden with Blackjack and his gang. He and Ketchum did not like each other, and Ketchum avoided Curry as much as possible. Kid Curry would kill 9 lawmen over the course of the next 8 years, and as we like to say in northern New Brunswick, he was an active criminal. During this time, Tom Ketchum was once identified mistakenly as Blackjack Christian, another outlaw, and that became his nickname as well. 3 of the train robberies that the gang committed were near the same location between Folsom and Des Moines, which was then in the New Mexico territory. This was at the point where the old Fort Lincoln Wagon Road crossed the Colorado and Southern Railroad tracks near Twin Mountain. Now, on September 3, 1897, they committed the first robbery at Twin Mountain. Then, on July 11, 1899, the gang, without Blackjack, robbed the train again at Twin Mountain. After a robbery, Sam and several unknown gang members, in addition to Wild Bunch gang members Will Carver and William Ellsworth Elsie Lay, headed for the mountains southwest of Raton, New Mexico. The next day, a posse consisting of Sheriff Ed Farr of Huron-Fonto County, Colorado, Special Agent W.H. Reno of the Colorado and Southern Railroad, and 5 deputies found their trail and tracked them into Turkey Creek Canyon near Cimarron, New Mexico. There, the posse engaged them in a gun battle. Sam Ketchum and 2 deputies were wounded seriously, but the gang escaped. Now, Sam Ketchum's wound slowed the intended escape, and he made it only a short distance from the initial shootout. Several members of the posse cornered the Ketchum gang a few days later, still in the same area of the territory. Deputy Love and Sheriff Farr engaged the outlaws in another gun battle, resulting in both Love and Farr being killed, while the posse wounded at least 2 unknown members of the gang. Sam Ketchum escaped, but was found a few days later by Special Agent Reno at the home of a rancher, where he was arrested. Now, Sam Ketchum was taken to the Santa Fe Territorial Prison, where he died from his gunshot wounds. He was buried in the Oddfellows Rest Cemetery, now the Fairview Cemetery, off on Cyrillus Road in Santa Fe. Now, Eli Lay was born again November 25, 1968, in Mount Pleasant, Ohio. Lay had come west to Denver and became an outlaw after mistakenly believing he had killed a man. Jailed for life at the killing of Sheriff Farr after a Folsom robbery, he was eventually released in 1906. He returned to Alma, New Mexico, and there lived for 2 years. He stayed with Lewis and Walter Jones, who in 1904 had built a large merchandise store at Alma. Elsie died aged 65 in L.A. on November 10, 1934. Now, On August 16th, 1899, Tom Ketchum, supposedly knowing nothing of the July 11th holdup which ended the death of his brother Sam, single-handedly attempted to rob the same train again, at the same place, and in the same way that he and Sam and others had robbed it just a few weeks earlier. Now the train conductor, Frank Harrington, saw Tom approaching the moving train. He recognized him, grabbed a shotgun, and shot Tom in the arm, knocking him off his horse. The train continued, and the next day a posse came out and found Tom beside the tracks, badly wounded. He was transferred to medical facilities at Trinidad, Colorado, and his right arm had to be amputated. He was nursed back to health and then sent to Clayton, New Mexico for a trial. At the trial, Ketchum was convicted and sentenced to death. He was eventually became the only person ever hanged in Union County, New Mexico Territory, which is now Union County, New Mexico. He was also the only person who suffered capital punishment for the offense of felonious assault upon a railway train in the New Mexico Territory, which did not become a state until 1912. Later, the law was found to be unconstitutional. So he was more executed for his previous crimes in the view of a lot of people who has followed his career of nefariousness. But under Commonwealth law, you can't be executed for a non-fatal incident. But in the States, again, it didn't really apply because it was a territory at the time. Now, Ketchum was executed by hanging in Clayton. Nobody in Clayton had any experience in conducting the hangings, and this is what happened. According to published reports, the rope was too long, and since Ketchum had gained a significant amount of weight during his time in jail, some people believe up to 30 pounds, because of the poor distribution between his weight and the rope, he was decapitated when he dropped through the trap door. Now, his last words were reported by the San Francisco Chronicle as, "Goodbye, please dig my grave very deep. All right, hurry up." A popular postcard was made showing the body. Afterwards, his head was sewn back onto the body for viewing, and he was interred at the Clayton Cemetery. Now, what's kind of bizarre about this, various semi-fiction and non-fiction publications and presentations have covered Blackjack Ketchum's life. Western actor Jackie Lamb, one of the better Western actors of his generation, portrayed Ketchum in the episode of the 1954-55 syndicated television series Stories of the Century. Now, Howard Duff, of all people, played Ketchum in the 1957 American Western film Blackjack Ketchum Desperado. Now, Rhodes Reason played Ketchum in a 1959 episode of the American Western television series Frontier Doctor. Now, there is photos of his before the execution. The postcard shows after the execution with his decapitated head. We're not going to show this here because, again, even for modern times, it's a little bit too graphic. But all I can say is that I've never heard of anybody executed in this way, and for monetary gain, had their head sewn back on their body to present a better version of the photo. If the words of the prophets are to be believed, if you're going to be executed, you have no say as to what happens to your body afterwards. And this is not the first time due to hanging people have been decapitated, but in the other cases, especially with the Canadian execution in Ontario, it eventually led to the decommissioning of the Canadian execution law because it was declared what he called excessive punishment for the crime, and in some cases innocent people were being sent to the gallows, and so it was a combination of that. But if you're a fan of the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang, if you're a fan of late 19th century and early 20th century true crime in the Old West, which is a genre of itself, this is the case for you. So that's the story of Blackjack Tom Ketchum. If you like what we're doing here, we're a vintage crime recaps, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s across North America. We have a podcast of most of the last executions across Canada over the last over the 20th century mostly. Check it out. We provide this as a public information service, not to glorify the crimes or to diminish the importance of what you call execution. Some countries still perform executions of criminals. I'm not one to judge. I'm just providing information as a public service, and to say that sometimes a crime leads to a very, very weird sentence for the crime. In this case, his head was removed from his body, although accidental. Very bizarre. Thanks for listening. Bye.